Okay, proceed to number 2, please.
The existence and effect of potential voting rights that are currently exercisable or convertible, including potential voting rights held by other entities, are not considered when assessing whether an entity has significant influence. False.
What makes it false?
It is considered when assessing answer whether an entity has significant influence.
It is considered. That's correct. Let me just explain number 2, class. Di ba we want to determine whether there is significant influence, and one way of determining that there is significant influence is if your interest reaches 20%. Now, you do not just look at the existing voting rights, class. You do not just look at the existing shares. You look at those that can potentially provide you with additional shares. What do I mean? I'm not sure if you have heard of convertible bonds before, class. Convertible bonds are bonds. They are liabilities. They are obligations. Okay, but they can be converted. You gave your creditor an option to convert it into shares. Instead of paying for the bond, class, instead of paying for the liability, you agreed to make the creditor a part owner of the business. So instead of paying for the convertible bond, the bond or liability is converted into shares. Then you have to take into account what if that creditor decides to convert the bond into voting shares, and that creditor already has existing shares in the business. So you take into account the potential voting shares that the creditor may acquire if he decides to convert the bonds. If after converting the bonds, class, he will now have at least 20% interest in the business, then there will now be a presumption of significant influence. You do not just look at the present and existing shares, class. You look at those shares that can potentially have voting rights and will ultimately result in at least 20% shareholdings. Another example, class, would be preferred shares, convertible preferred shares. Normally, class, preferred shares do not have voting rights. Only ordinary share capital or common shares will have voting rights. But if you have convertible preferred shares that can be converted into ordinary shares, can be converted into voting shares, then you also have to take that into consideration in determining whether a particular person has significant influence. Your holders of preferred shares, convertible preferred shares, already have existing voting rights. Now, what if after converting their preferred shares, their total voting rights or voting shares will reach 20%? Then that means there is already a presumption that there is significant influence. Class number 1 and number 2 will be important as far as knowing whether past 28 is to be applied or not. Continue with number 3.
An entity loses significant influence over an investee when it loses the power to participate in the financial and operating policy decisions of that investee. True.
Aside from 20%, when else can you say that you have significant influence? It's number 8 in your textbook, class. Okay? If you have a representation in the board of directors, while in statement number 3, that's letter B, participation in policy making. Letter C, material transaction between the investor and the investee, and some other factors. Please make sure to be familiar with the other indicators of the presence of significant influence. But the second most common indicator here, class, aside from the 20%, is that you are participating in the financial and operating policy decisions of the investee corporation. Again, please go over number 8 in the textbook, class. So number 3 is true. Okay, continue, please.
When instruments containing potential voting rights in substance currently give access to the returns associated with an ownership interest in an associate or a joint venture, the instruments are not subject to PFRS 9. True.
That's true. But we don't have to focus so much here, class. This is more of a concern of PFRS 9 and PFRS 11. Joint ventures or joint arrangements, as they are called now, class, are covered by PFRS 11. We will now discuss PAS 28 solely for investment in associates lang.